Thanks for listening to Hermit Radio. My name is Cameron, and this is the first official episode. For this episode, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about myself. I'm going to try and keep it short so that it doesn't get boring and kind of ranty. But my story is a lot like a lot of yours. I'm sure a lot of you guys that are listening, if you're following my Instagram, you have a very similar story, and that's why you're here. Right now I'm standing outside, pretty much in the middle of nowhere in nature. So if you guys hear bugs and wind and birds, that's why. I won't be doing all of these episodes like this, but it just felt inspiring to be outside in nature, so I thought I'd share that with you guys. So my journey started in Oregon when I was a kid, and I had a great childhood coming up. And like a lot of other people, it was normal, right? I had a mom and dad. They didn't get divorced. I had a brother and a sister. I went to school. Very basic things. There was nothing about my childhood that I would say was out of the ordinary or, I lacked in some way. And the one thing that was prevalent was that I felt it was necessary, even as a young child, I wanted to join the military. So after high school was done, I enlisted in the Army, and I chose to be infantry. So some of you, if you don't know what that is, that's just basically a ground soldier. If you were in the military, you'll know exactly what that is. And the first thing I noticed about being in the military was that it was nothing like I expected it to be. I grew up watching Band of Brothers, and I thought that's exactly what it was going to be like. And of course, that's my perception, right? So we all have that, and there's nothing wrong with it, but that's the way it was. And there's nothing wrong with the military either. I don't regret my time in the service. It was just very different than what I expected. It's a lot harder, and it's a lot tougher than most people think it is right off the bat. It's an everyday job. It's an all-day thing. You don't just get to leave. You don't get to make choices for yourself. But it is what it is. I chose to do that, so I have zero regrets, but I'm just explaining the situation. In 2011, I got deployed to Afghanistan, and I was very fortunate to get to do some cool stuff. I was still a regular infantry guy, but I got to go with special forces, so we got to do a very different type of mission set. We were kind of out on our own. We got to make our own missions. We worked with the population. We did a lot of different things. And some people who are listening to this, if you've deployed before, I wouldn't say that it was the most kinetic. It wasn't the most aggressive deployment ever, right? Some things happened, but most of the time nothing happened. But for me, unfortunately, one day towards the end of the deployment, my truck happened to run over an IED, and it was pretty big. I wasn't wearing my seatbelt, and I wasn't wearing a helmet at the time. And when I flew out of my seat, I smashed my head on the roof of the truck. I didn't really know at the time, because it's very confusing when something like that happens, but I'd sustained a very bad concussion. And when I got back to the camp after the mission was done, I kind of knew that. I started getting sick, I started dry heaving. I had a really bad headache, but we just didn't really have the ability to leave the camp. We didn't really have the ability to get medevaced out to go get help. And plus, we didn't want to leave anybody short. We were working with a small team as it was. Any one person that leaves made it more difficult for us to go out on missions. So nobody, even if they had a really bad injury, nobody really wanted to leave. So fast forward, I get back from my deployment, and I start noticing right away that I've got some other issues going on. I started having headaches, and I started losing my temper more, but the mission goes on. You have to just keep doing what you're doing. I did complain about it to my superiors, and they chose to ignore it, and they told me to just suck it up and keep going. And so I did. I don't blame them. It's not their fault. Nothing that happened to me is anybody's fault but my own. But that is the situation. That's what happened. Exactly like that. Years later, I did finally get out of the military, and I met my wife. And my wife was not about being aggressive or violent in any way, shape, or form. And so it took me a while to figure that out. It took me a while to kind of get a grab on my attitude and my problems with the world, right? I was a very angry individual. I lost my patience all the time. I was very short-tempered, and to be quite honest, most of the time, I didn't even know why I was mad. I didn't know why I felt the way I felt. I was just like this angry, blind rage all the time. And if I drank, it got even worse, right? But in my own confusion, I would convince myself that drinking would help me get over it. Drinking would help me keep it calm, right? It didn't. It usually doesn't. Doesn't really work for anybody unless you're doing it in a safe amount and you know that it is what it is. You know that it's just alcohol. It's not a medicine. But for me, I didn't. So then I quit drinking. But even after I quit drinking, I still had problems with anger. I still had problems with anxiety. I still had problems with just being in the normal population. And then I got a civilian job. I started working for a gym. And I thought that this would be a good opportunity for me to kind of like get integrated back into the world and start talking to people again. And it was, but not at first. At first, I was still very, very on edge and very angry. I never liked people, arguing with me or presenting their problems to me, because in my mind, my ego would say, well, who are you, right? Like, you haven't been blown up. You haven't been to Afghanistan. Why are you complaining about this little minute thing, right? Like, it could be something as simple as your coffee's out, right? Your coffee machine's out of coffee. And I would get so mad. I'd be like, well, who are you? Who are you to say that the coffee's out, right? And that's the thing. That's your ego. My ego was powerful at the time, and it controlled me, or I allowed it to control me, and I just didn't know any better. And then, I eventually got the hang of it, and then a couple years later, I finally started to kind of get a grip. I stopped letting these outside things bug me. I used to be a bodybuilder, believe it or not. I used to be 220 pounds and pretty lean. I was a big guy, but I was only doing that because of my ego. It was just armor to protect me from my emotions and to protect me from the outside world. I figured the bigger I was, the more intimidating I was, the more people would leave me alone, or the more the people would respect me, right? But it doesn't do either of those things. It only does that in your mind. So I tore my pectoral muscle twice, and then I ended up developing sciatica so bad that I couldn't get off the floor for a week. So I started losing weight almost immediately. And then the funny thing was that once I started losing weight, my back started to feel better. And I started to get better. And it started changing things for me. And I was like, whoa, okay. And then I realized I don't need this anymore. This is just armor. This is just something that I needed to make myself feel better. But I feel better now, and I don't need this anymore. And that was just the start. Once I did that, then I started doing things like fasting and meditating. And my whole world changed after that. I'm sure, and if any of you are listening to this, I'm sure that you're in the same place, and that's probably why you're listening to this right now. It was just a sign that it was time for me to change, and it was good. And my whole attitude and my whole outlook on life started changing. I started researching ancient cultures. I started reading about Egypt and India and Tibet, and I started feeling connected with them. And I was reading about how they would meditate. Meditation was their way of communicating with the gods, whatever that means. So I wanted to try it, and it brought me peace, and it made me feel better. It made me lose some of those aspects of life that were really difficult, right? Like the fear, the anxiety, and always worrying all the time. So I started focusing on that. I spent all of my time trying to develop that feeling and work in my meditation. And I started reading a book called The Sacred Path of the Warrior. The actual word for it is Shambhala. And it's a Tibetan kind of ritualistic or religious, if you will, kind of way of life. But the warrior in this sense is a peaceful warrior, a warrior that is able to rise above ignorance and aggression and violence. When somebody walks into a room and they start yelling and screaming, this person is so nice and so kind that it causes the other people in the room to be kind and peaceful. And I liked that. I liked that idea. And I liked the idea about the Buddha, That is how I believe the world can change someday, is that we all got to learn to get along with each other. That's another story for another time, but that's kind of where I kind of went on my way. And in that process, I started practicing this at work. I would go back to work, and instead of being a jerk, or getting frustrated with everybody and their problems, I just accepted them for what they were, and I allowed them to happen. And then I started noticing a change, and I started feeling better because I didn't judge everybody for what was going on, or I took responsibility when things were my fault. And I just started feeling better. Nothing has changed. It's just your perception. It's just your outlook. And that was what had changed for me. And it makes the world a lot more fun. I appreciate the trees more. I appreciate the sky more. All the animals, Next time, if you are listening to this, next time you get a chance, just go outside for 10 minutes and just listen and just appreciate it, because it's a miracle that it exists. It's a miracle that we are here and a part of it. So that's my story. Moving forward after this, I'm going to be doing some interviews with some of my friends and some people I know, and we're going to be talking about some different topics. Some of them will be light, and some of them won't be so light, and you can choose to listen to it if you'd like or not. If you would like to subscribe, that would be great. If you would like more information about when the episodes are going to come out, or more information about me, you can go to my Instagram. It's For Those Who Follow, with an underscore in between each word. You can find updates there, or you can leave comments and let me know if there's something you want to hear or if you have a question for me. But thanks for listening, and this is Hermit Radio.